Welcome back, everybody. We are back in another book. No, not another book. The same book, the book of Esther, but another chapter in that book, chapter 8 today. And if you remember from the previous chapter, the story has shifted from Haman, who was the evil sort of villain character in this book. He was out to get Mordecai, he was out to annihilate the Jews. And chapter 8 is where the story shifts from near destruction to a dramatic, only God can do it reversal. And if the earlier chapters in the book of Esther were a suspense movie, then this chapter is the moment where the hero finally gets the authority to stop the evil villain's plans. Without further ado, let's dive in. Alright, so to kick off chapter 8, after the downfall of Haman, the king gives Haman's estate over to Esther. Esther then gives it to Mordecai, and she reveals that Mordecai is her cousin and her guardian. Verse 2 says, I'm on the wrong page. Verse 2 says this: The king took off his signet ring, which he had already taken back from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. I cannot talk today. I'm so sorry. So that signet ring represented the king's authority to do things or to make laws and decrees on behalf of the king. Mordecai basically goes from civil servant nobody to a prime minister level influence overnight in the beginning of chapter 8. Then we see Esther again pleading for the Jewish people, for her people. Even though Haman is gone, the decree to destroy the Jews is still an active decree because in Persian law can't just be revoked or erased or anything like that. So Esther goes again before the king, falling at his feet in desperation. And in verse 3 it says, Then Esther went again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. Now notice Esther's courage here. She's already risked her life once going before the king uninvited. Now she's going back again before the king uninvited. And if you remember, unless he holds out his golden scepter indicating that she's found favor in his sight, that she's safe, she's to be put to death. So this kind of courage and this kind of persistence from Esther, it says, I still have unfinished work to do and I'm not going to leave until my people are safe. So the king, he extends his golden scepter again, which is a good sign. You definitely want the scepter, not the security guards, and she pleads her case once again to the king. So then the king tells Esther and Mordecai something frustrating in verse 8. It says, Go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, seal it with the king's signet ring, but remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. In other words, the empire's legal system was like sending that email that you really regret and you wish you could hit unsend, but once it's out there, it's out there. No takey backsies. So instead of canceling the original decree, Mordecai organizes this new decree. He sends it all across the empire, giving the Jews the right to protect themselves if they were attacked. In verse 9, it shows us that. It says, On June 25th, the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Mordecai dictated. It was sent to the Jews and to the highest officers, the governors, the nobles of all 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the people of the empire, including that of the Jews. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Mordecai sent the dispatches by swift messengers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king's service. So this is like the ancient day emergency broadcast system, except instead of push notifications that we get on our Apple or Android phones, it's a guy on very motivated horses, especially bred for these types of things. Then in verse 15, we see Mordecai leaving the king's presence. He's wearing a royal robe of blue and white. He's wearing a great crown of gold and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. The people of Susa celebrated the new decree. So if you remember from earlier in the story, Mordecai was wearing sackcloth and ashes. He was grieving on behalf of the Jewish people and on behalf of that decree that Haman had sent out to destroy the Jewish people. Now we see him dressed like royalty. And I think this beautifully shows how quickly circumstances can change when God starts moving behind the scenes in our lives. And the result is Jewish celebration across the empire. Verse 16 shows the Jews were filled with joy and gladness and were honored everywhere. And then the chapter concludes by saying, And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So even many of the non-Jewish people, they begin aligning themselves with the Jewish people, and that's just kind of a cool way to end this chapter. The very same people who were supposed to be annihilated, who were supposed to be wiped out, they're now gaining respect, they're now gaining protection, I mean, just talk about a plot twist in this story, am I right? All right, here's the big things that I saw in Esther chapter 8. God can reverse circumstances like that. Haman's house was given to Esther. The signet ring that was once Haman's was given to Mordecai. And the Jewish destruction became Jewish protection and celebration and joy and gladness. The entire chessboard flips in a single chapter in the book of Esther, and it's just a won't he do it moment. Second thing that I saw here was courage and persistence from Esther. Esther doesn't stop after exposing Haman. She continues to advocate for her people. And I think for us, faith often feels very similar, where you pray once, and then you pray again, and you take action, and then you pray again. And it's just continuing to exercise that faith. And oh, that we would have the courage and the persistence of Esther. And then, obviously, like I've mentioned before in the book of Esther, we don't see God's name explicitly mentioned here in chapter 8, just like all the previous chapters, but we can see his providence moving everywhere throughout the story of Esther. And I think that the timing, the favor, the influence, all of it lines up perfectly, and all of it shows that God is moving behind the scenes. All right, so with Esther chapter 8, basically we saw mourning turned into celebration. We saw fear become honor. We saw weakness become influence. What if the season that you and I are in right now is just the middle part of the story? What if the decree that's hanging over your life is not the final word? What if God is already positioning people, opportunities, and timing that you can't even see yet? The same God who reversed everything in Esther's story is still writing people's stories today. And if he did it then, he'll do it now. And if the same God is still working behind the scenes, like he did in Esther, shouldn't we trust him? Because when God decides to turn the page, there's no enemy, there's no decree, there's no circumstance that can stop what he is about to do. Won't he do it?